It had to be decades ago that I was asked by someone, and I am afraid I don't remember who, whether I thought people could really change. What I do recall is that our contact was in passing, and so I didn't really have very much time to answer the question. What I did manage to get out in the brief time allotted was that I believed that people have moments in their lives, perhaps very short moments, when they do have the opportunity to change, if only they were aware of it. In another respect, he was actually asking the wrong person, because my life had changed substantially at the point he was asking the question, and I knew very well from personal experience that the people most likely to change were people who have gone through traumatic episodes and major changes when they were very young. That is, if they were capable of discovering the ability to change, and if their hardships did not break them. From which the saying comes, "What doesn't kill me only makes me stronger." A quote that I now see is attributed to Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher who it is believed died of tertiary syphilis. Clearly, he recognized the relationship between suffering and change in his articulation of this point of philosophy. But why hasn't psychology done a methodical investigation of why people change and how people change? Rather, it seems that psychologists instead rely on psychological theories that are intended to make a person more comfortable in the way they are living, rather than help them confront the challenges that face them in the course of their lives and in the course of a day. It is a psychology of comfort rather than one that helps people confront their challenges in order to maximize their adaptation in adversity. Most clients are comfortable with that, and that could explain the reason why I never had many clients at any particular time. Not that I would get in people's faces and demand that they change. Rather, as I said before, I tended to ask questions that provoked thought, and that was something that we could do together, however difficult it may have appeared. Many people who go to therapy really don't want to change radically at all. Not that radical change is necessary in any or most situations, but they find unexpected questions to be a bit of an annoyance. And the majority of them simply want to be listened to, which is also okay if you have the patience to do it. I don't lack for patience, but I should also note that if you ask a good question, you're alerting the client to the fact that you are actively engaged in what they are telling you and demonstrating it by how you respond. But let me say that most of the psychological theories that I had studied at school didn't help me in approaching this kind of client by asking a specific kind of question. Rather, they seem to want to make clients more comfortable in their own skin in the place that they were in, rather than do it in the situations that were most challenging to them. This would be the "I'm okay, you're okay" philosophy, and there was a book by that title, if you're not aware. But let's look at the most prevalent theories, the ones that were current at the time that I was studying in my master's program and also for my doctorate. They should still all be familiar to you. There is Freudian theory that had patients lay passively on a couch and free associate or discuss their dreams, with commentary by the authority who was the psychiatrist practicing this form of treatment. This is a passive form of treatment that doesn't encourage the patient to necessarily focus on the kind of problems that confront them in their daily lives, but rather relies on an examination of the unconscious to see if there are any solutions that make them feel better about who they are and perhaps offer some way forward, although indirectly. Regarding Jungian theory, I would say that I did have a couple of sessions with the Jungian therapist in which I was asked to record my dreams and actually write them down upon waking, and even waking up during a dream so that I could record them, to bring them in for further examination with an expert who was trained in discussing the significance of dream symbols and the unconscious drama that might be affecting my life. My problem was the same problem as for most people, that is, that I didn't remember dreams if I had any. I also didn't find it particularly encouraging when I was told that I must have dreams, that everyone has dreams, and that I simply am not remembering them because I'm not making an effort to. So this too is a passive form of therapy in my regard. And it seems strange that all hell could be breaking loose in your life, but that the only way you could interpret your experience was first falling asleep and examining what you dreamed during that period of time, if you have dreams at all. I would assume, for example, that people with PTSD would rather not have dreams because those are the most disruptive dreams of all. But then the one psychologist who was given the most weight in his theory was Carl Rogers, whose humanistic theory actually rendered the treatment provider to be most passive in the application of the theory. That is, he had a whole method of questioning that was to elicit information from the client or patient that would allow them to discover the solution of their own problem. And if I remember correctly, it formed the basis for what became the standard, that is, active listening theory. Asking open-ended questions, reflection of feeling, paraphrasing, and most of all, non-judgmental listening. I will say up front that I wasn't the best practitioner of this, not because I ever intended to be a rebel within psychology or within counseling, but rather my background in the master's program and the doctoral program was somewhat different than the other people in the class. And I tend to forget what that background was. The reason is that I never put it in a resume, nor did I ever discuss it with very many people, if any at all. In fact, I can't think of a one. In fact, my introduction to psychological thought was in an area that was considered fringe, and I would still bet is not discussed at all, except in those places where the training exists and it is practiced. That is, psychodrama. Rather than being passive, the practice of psychodrama made all the participants very active and enacting essentially any problem that an individual might have within a room by having all the participants essentially create a drama with them as actors, focusing on the person who has the problem in the first place. This was hardly considered in the mainstream of psychology, and I was led into it at all by my girlfriend at the time, who told me about it, so I thought I would give it a try. I will say that it did disrupt my life in ways that I couldn't have imagined, some for the better and some for the worse, but it did make me aware of the possibility that people could change when presented with problems dramatically that they have encountered in the past or even at the time that they were enacting the psychodrama. I will say it was helpful to me back then, but because of the way it was practiced, I was also aware that there were other people involved in the group who were hurt by their participation in some of these exercises. And I believe part of the problem was in the way it was taught, which may have gone back to the original theory of Mr. Moreno, in what appeared to be an underlying idea that if you were to confront a person with the same problems that they have been having difficulty with, that you should also provide them with the opportunity to address those problems in a different way. And if you confront them directly, they may actually feel forced to do different things that really aren't in their capacity to do. And that was the source of any destruction that occurred in that environment. Of course, I didn't know any of this. I knew nothing really about psychodrama, or even at the time, almost nothing about formal psychology as I was later to study it. But for whatever destruction it created for others, and to a certain extent for me, I wasn't ready to throw the whole thing out because it did contribute something to my life and my way of thinking. And it is here that I will offer the possibility of diagnosing with your gut, because any psychodrama did elicit feelings that were highly emotional and sometimes gut-wrenching. And especially feeling pressured to respond in a new way was an unexpected and difficult challenge for many of the participants. But for me at least, and perhaps for a few others, I had already suffered enough pain and trauma that this was hardly going to break me. Rather, it did prompt me to think about myself and my place in the world with others in an entirely different way. Unfortunately, most of the other people were not that flexible, and I think after they were done, they preferred to forget the experience that they had. But let me say that none of this is the point I'm going after in bringing up psychodrama in this discussion. Rather, I want to introduce the concept that there are different forms of thinking that are readily available to everyone, but that most people do not consider and are unaware of when they are confronting issues in their daily lives. What psychodrama did introduce me to was the notion that if people participate in a drama, both as the protagonist, that is the center of the drama, and all those people who participate, that is, people in the protagonist's life that are presenting them with the problems and difficulties that brought them in, that even the cast of characters that surround them, all of those people that fill those roles during the drama, get into it to an extent that they can actually feel what it was like to be the person that is presenting the protagonist with the problem, and do it with almost the same conviction and frequently with the very same verbiage that the protagonist was used to hearing that created the problem in the first place. You could call this acting, but having been in that situation myself, that is, being an actor interacting with the protagonist, I discovered that if they described that person enough, you could intuitively get into it and actually feel the conviction that those other participants in the person's life are feeling when they confront them. That is to say that the actors in this psychodramatic play may have exactly the same feelings as they take on the role of the characters, making the drama extremely realistic for the person who is having the difficulty in the first place. In fact, they can totally re-experience the trauma for the authenticity for how the surrounding actors present themselves in the guise of others in the protagonist's life. But the question for me was at the time, how do you get to that place? How do you get to a place where you take on the guise of someone you do not even know and have the same motivation in confronting the protagonist, the individual who is the center of the drama, and do it with an unexpected authenticity that might even be frightening for the protagonist. And for those of us who did not actively participate in the psychodrama, you could see its effects. It was made very obvious by the reaction of the protagonists and of all the characters who entered into the play. The extent to which it was helpful or hurtful very much depended on the fragility of the protagonist in the first place and whether or not they could handle being confronted by the very same issues that they are having problems with other people, that is, strangers, people they did not know, finding out about these surrounding characters who actually are able to fill it in so well that they could spook the person if they are particularly fragile, the one who is the protagonist in the play. But this all occurred almost 50 years ago, and I would assume almost everyone survived it and moved on. But it leaves me with the question, the one that I have just asked, which is, how do people enter someone else's life in a fictional portrayal of what is actually very realistic and that has the potential to repeat those issues that might cause them harm? How do people enter into a drama that is so personal and applicable to others and do it accurately? Which led me to a formation of an idea, one of my own making, that would help describe why acting and drama are so compelling, whether fictional or, as in the case of psychodrama, realistic as applied to a real individual in a real situation. And the thought is simply this. We have the gray matter of the brain, the cerebrum. It's our intellect and the source of our knowledge. But we also have an active limbic system that we choose to dismiss as the lizard brain. This is the stuff that retains and conveys emotions, those things that, if we allow it to speak, actually perceives things that the cerebrum might not want to consider as important in functioning in life. And yet, I concluded, the lizard brain, the limbic system, can guide us in ways that our intellect prefers not to recognize because it can be so emotional and reactive to what is happening around us. Rather than dismiss it, we may choose to use it as a tool, and we may see its articulation in many places that we don't even consider. For example, I think of the actor Humphrey Bogart, whose movies I truly love, and many other people do. You look at him in almost all of his films, and he always seems to be Humphrey Bogart, although there are exceptions where he really transcends himself. But why is it that he can be Humphrey Bogart and still be somebody else that is the character in a rather elaborate play? I would argue that he has to reach for something deep within himself, something at the emotional level, something that may even be the product of the lizard brain that actually gives it an expression and a logic that most people choose to ignore, but that he uses to project someone other than himself that is believable, even though we all recognize him as the very same person, with the very same voice, and oftentimes with similar emotions, but in a different dramatic effect. I would argue that this kind of thinking, the one that we believe is so primitive, is in fact rather elaborate, but is closer to our emotional systems than most people want to deal with, because of the possibility that many people can be overrun by emotions if they let the limbic system take advantage of any other kind of confusion or weakness. So putting this all to the side, what does this have to do with psychotherapy or with diagnosis? I would say that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about my past in psychodrama. In fact, I probably hardly think about it at all. But what I do think about is the possibility that some of the tools that I took from that training I actually bring within an interview, both for therapy and for assessment. How can we take this understanding and apply it to psychodiagnostics? And if you will, where do I get my good questions from? How is it that I ask about things that clients don't expect to be asked about and don't really think about until they come into my office? And let me first say that when I'm questioning, I try to get sufficient details so that I can imagine being in that kind of situation. That is a psychodramatic exercise, and I'm not saying we need to stage a psychodrama in order to have this happen, or for me to confront the person that I am attempting to provide therapy or attempting to assess. Rather, It's that I listen to their stories, ask questions to get sufficient detail in order to be able to imagine myself in that situation. Essentially, I am asking my limbic system, if you will, to participate in the discussion. That is, to help me imagine what it's like to be there in order to formulate my interview and to arrive at my assessment and my subsequent diagnosis. I don't pull it out of the air. I pull it out of my imagination, and I don't inhibit what my emotions and my limbic system are telling me about being in those kinds of situations. I structure the interviews based on this very premise. That is, that I imagine myself there, and when I reach the point where I can start going further in depth by asking the specifics about the source of stress and anxiety, the response is all too often, "How did you know that? How did you know to ask that question?" in what amounts to an invitation to the client to think more deeply about their own motivations and how they respond to individuals, to the problems that confront them. It's almost as if I am in that situation with them, only I am of course removed and can ask those kinds of questions and can invite them to explore them more fully rather than to subject themselves to those things that cause them pain. This is a way of inviting them to solve their own problems because I don't push them in any way similar to what we did in psychodrama, but I let them react to what I've introduced and let them go from there. It's not that the questioning ends or that I lose any contact with who they are as people, but rather I continue in what is essentially a more intimate dialogue than Carl Rogers might have introduced with his open-ended questions. It's a way of saying, almost subliminally, you're not alone, and I am not going to intrude on your space, on your limitations, or how you choose to solve your own problems, but I invite you to think about some of these problems in a way that may be a little different than what you're used to. And the funny thing is that if a client can get there, they seem to become more comfortable in the understanding that the person they're working with may have a better grasp of what their problems are than they did when they walked in the door. So that if this is the appropriate therapy for them, they will recognize that they are not alone in the problem, but they are actively working with someone who has had the experience or can address it in a way that they would be able to think about it in a way that they hadn't before. And I don't mind sitting back and even allowing that I am not the wise person to give them an answer to a question that they have about their own lives. They continue to be the wise one and continue to be at the main focus of their problem and how they go about trying to solve it. Dare I say, this is not Freud, Jung, Carl Rogers. It is my approach to therapy, but I would say the center is them, not any theory, but how they live their lives and how they think about what is happening to them. Their emotional reactions are never dismissed, but are integrated into how they feel about things. In essence, it's their emotions coming from the limbic system as well as their intellect that is integrated into the treatment. This is how we can connect. It is also how they can withdraw if they feel they need to because they are having difficulty coping with the issues that are under discussion. This is perhaps best articulated by the I-thou philosophy of Martin Buber, who distinguishes it from I-it. That is the difference between approaching people as equal and engaged with each other as opposed to objects in our environment simply to get past or interact with either confrontationally or through avoidance. It's what I have expressed as us all swimming around in the same soup. If we can't relate with ourselves, we certainly will not be able to relate with others. and our value system will be dramatized by the things that we do in the world. I think specifically of the value we place on material things as we interact with others. We even consider other people as just objects surrounding us that we need to get past in order to acquire more, to allow us to go further in the material world that we live in. Either that, or we interact with people who have conscience, who have consciousness, who have souls, and who have their own problems that may be the source, their appearance as obstacles in our world. It's the reason that I don't put much emphasis on behaviorism or cognitive behaviorism. It's almost as if the goal is to change behavior without thinking about the kind of consciousness that motivates that behavior. Yes, I can and have used behavioral interventions in the past. If I were still working, no doubt I would in the future. But behaviorism itself, or even cognitive behaviorism, misses the essential point. What's motivating the individual? What's driving the situation that they find themselves in? Are they creating it for themselves, or are other people creating it for them? Are other people obstacles, or are they assistants? Are they obstacles or assistants to other people? And we have to conclude that traditional forms of therapy have been, in the end, prescriptive, while what I am introducing here is much more like storytelling. It's a narrative, and how that person participates in that narrative and how they recognize their involvement in it. The questions that I ask come out of this. We may not like other people, but we have to live with them. And we may see that most of our problems come from other people, but if we don't recognize our own participation in that interaction, we will never be able to solve the problem. The therapy that I am suggesting would have us explore the characteristics of that interaction together. And for many people, it is a gut reaction, something that they simply feel that they might not necessarily be able to articulate. And yet the articulation itself can be extremely important in understanding, because if you can formulate the words, if you can express the narrative and say what's going on, which includes an emotional understanding as well as an intellectual one, you are far better positioned to change what you do with others and how you interact in the world. So what I suggested before was basing diagnostics on functioning rather than symptoms, or what has been expressed recently, particularly in a political context. Watch what people do, don't listen to what they say. It's through actions and our understanding of actions that we can begin to predict outcome both for ourselves and for others. That's how we can be the most helpful to each other. And on that note, I will finish by saying, as I have been saying in the past, be well, stay healthy, and don't go crazy. May I add additionally, if you like these discussions at all, please subscribe, because it will encourage me to continue to produce these discussions. And if you think others may benefit, please tell them about it. It's very difficult to approach something like this, dictating to a microphone without having any response. Let me know what you think.